Okay, y'all, this week on the Perpetual Background Shuffle, I want to talk to you about airlines and their competition and what we can learn from it. I just recently flew from Texas to Los Angeles to visit my parents, hence the background change because I'm doing this in my parents' garage, but something new happened to me that's never happened before with the baggage, right? I flew United because it was $78, which was like a total steal, but I guess they've changed their policy recently because I wasn't allowed to carry on a carry-on bag. I could only bring a personal item, right? Now for guys, it's great for us because we can literally just make it like a backpack, shovel a bunch of shit in there and put it under the seat in front of us, and it's kind of like almost having a second bag, right? So we get a little W there in comparison to girls who have like purses and such, right? But in years past, since I began flying as an adult, that's always been the standard, right? Minus the really cheap ones like Spirit or Frontier, which are always extremely restrictive with their baggage, right? So this was the first time United has done something like that to me, and I was forced to pay like $35 for my first bag, right? And they made me check it in too, which is really annoying. And plus I saw plenty of people bringing their bags on the plane and putting it in the overhead. So I don't know what the big deal was, but basically I had to check my bag in for $35, right? $35 plus the $80 I paid for the airfare is still a steal at $115. But if this is going to become the new standard for all the airlines and not just Spirit and Frontier, it's just another example of another freedom or standard that continually gets downgraded and the consumer becomes a loser and the flying experience becomes even worse and more of a headache, right? Great, I used to be able to expect at least taking one carry-on item and one personal item, and now I don't even get the carry-on anymore, right? The whole benefit of flying United and Delta and all these other big ones that weren't Spirit and Frontier was you get to have the personal item and the bag. That's like the whole selling point, right? Spirit and Frontier, you don't get that, right? It's strictly transactional, kind of like a prostitute, right? When you fly with Frontier or Spirit, they charge you for basically everything they possibly can at all times, right? On top of the airline fee, which is usually super cheap, right? It's kind of like when a prostitute gives you one rate, and then for every other little thing she does, she's going to charge you an additional micro fee, right? However, when you go with United or Delta, you at least got the bag. Literally on my boarding pass, it said, no carry-on item allowed, and it was just like, what the fuck? So again, if this is the new standard for all airlines, this is just another thing where we're just getting absolutely fucked as consumers in a market, right? So why am I making this video, right? This is not just the let's complain about everything channel all the time. There's a point to things that I say usually. So when you have these big companies, right, that are like United or Delta, and they have a product that's pretty good, right? Let's think about this 30 or 40 years ago. You used to get a meal on planes, right? And the whole flying experience was totally different, right? I remember as a child, there were a few times where I got a meal on domestic flights, and it was like, whoa, this is a pretty cool burger, right? But that disappeared years ago, right? Now there's TSA. Spaces are getting smaller and more crammed. For those of us who are over 6 foot, it's not always fun, especially flying on Spirit and Frontier. If you're in the middle seat and you're 6 foot, man, it's brutal, you know? That 28 inches, right? We all know what those extra inches can do in your life, right? And trust me, when you're flying Spirit or Frontier, the prostitute airlines, all those inches really do add up. So when you have a bunch of companies that all have this excellent product, right? We all want to fly somewhere and have access to all these cities, right? And within just a matter of a couple hours, right? Before you had to take a train or drive or take a boat. And that was just very impractical in terms of the time, right? That's the way they did it back then though, right? Before airplanes became very, very easily accessible, right? So what companies would rather do, and this is not just airlines, I'm using them as a scapegoat. This has happened in video games, with movies, TV shows. It happens everywhere, right? But what people would rather do is rather than come out with a new product or keep the product the same, they'd rather add bad features to it to say that, oh, we're changing things for the better, right? And of course, it's not everyone's fault at United, right? This is not like we're going to make our product worse, right? But when you have a big corporation or a big entity and the person at the top wants more money so that they can give more money to shareholders, so they can make more money for themselves, what they're going to want is more money, right? That doesn't necessarily mean they want more change. And sometimes you sacrifice other things without realizing that's going to actually negatively affect your balance. But with this, for example, United thinks like, oh yeah, well, you can get some of the passengers for an extra $35 or $65 if they wait to the gate. I did it 24 hours before because I read the thing at the bottom that told me I have to do it. So mine was only $35, but I'm sure some people didn't know about it and waited until they got to the gate. And it would have been $65 at the gate, which is total bullshit, by the way, right? It's $65 to take a bag, go down a few steps, put it on a plane. Yeah, fucking right. So when people have an excellent product, right? Whether it was flying the way it was originally introduced, whether it was like the internet the way it was originally introduced, right? Of course, the internet's a little bit different because we really needed a lot of change because it was so like barbaric in comparison to the way it is now. But the freedom that you had with the internet back then was unparalleled to today's, right? Today's is very much watered down. Video games too, that's like a perfect example, right? A few months ago, I made a video about The Last of Us, critiquing it and comparing it to the video game because I never played the video game. I just thought it would be fun to make a little video critiquing the whole series, and that's a perfect example. The first game was excellent and they kept the product awesome, and the game was like one of the classics. I never played it, but I looked at all the gameplay and the story and it looked really, really cool, right? However, when you get to the second video game had serious problems, right? Basically, the gameplay in the second game was much better than the first, or at least significantly better as far as I understand, but the story and the writing was absolutely terrible in the second game, right? So when you're the viewer of a TV show based on that, right? The first season was pretty reasonable for the TV show, but the second season we were stuck with the writing from the video game was absolutely fucking terrible. And we didn't even get the good gameplay from the video game. So this is like very typical, right? When you have your first video game, it's usually going to be pretty decent. The second one usually sucks. When you have your first video game and it's an absolute smashing success, right? To put out a sequel to that video game that's going to be equal, parallel, or even better than the first video game requires so much more effort to uphold that standard, right? And you can't take shortcuts, right? But what do companies typically do? Now they take shortcuts, and the quality of video games is just absolutely terrible today for the most part, right? And rather than give you a good product like a video game, right, they would rather find ways to monetize it with microtransactions and all these other ways to find options for the player or the consumer to pay more money rather than get the actual good product, right? Let's just say that The Last of Us 1 was worth $60, right? And The Last of Us 2 was worth $60. Well, the second game had a lot more flaws in terms of the writing, so someone like myself would probably not have liked it, right? But don't forget, both games are worth the same amount, right? And so the second game probably made them a shitload of money, even though it was worse, because it was piggybacking off the awesomeness of the first one. And all the sales at roughly an equal $60 made them a shitload of money, even though the game was worse, right? Let's look at movies. Movies is the same thing, right? When you look at like a first great movie and the sequel ends up sucking, you know what usually happened. They took shortcuts. They didn't honor the process that they followed in the first one. I think I remember Transformers was a pretty good example of this, where the first movie was pretty good or reasonable. The second one wasn't nearly as good, and the third and fourth, like the quality way dropped off, right? But hey, $10 for this movie ticket and $10 for that movie ticket, it's going to give them the same amount of money, right? So they don't necessarily care about that, right? And that installs really bad goodwill in the mind of the consumer, but the company doesn't give a fuck and doesn't need to give a fuck, right? Now we get back to flying, right? Well, when you have flying and you had an excellent product for years and years, right? Or at least from what my parents say, flying was an unparalleled experience, right? Those days are long gone. You could at least expect to bring like a bag or two, right? Well, fuck, we're losing things little by little here, right? No more food. Seats start sucking. Fucking the little trays are like smaller than ever now, right? At least they were kind of big back then, but now sometimes you get these little micro half trays and it's just like, what the fuck is this? You guys are so desperate to make extra money that you'll find extra ways to cut costs and cut this little tray in half. I mean, come on. So when it comes to United, why did this happen? Well, probably what happened is someone was having a gun pointed to their head by a shareholder or someone higher up. You better come up with a good idea to make some extra money and I don't give a fuck or you lose your job, right? And so the guy's probably just sitting, throwing a tennis ball at a wall, being like, look, I got nothing else. We're just gonna have to start charging extra for bags rather than improving the product or the service. We're just gonna have to hit them with other ways to monetize them, you know? You got a personal item in a bag? Well, sorry, go fuck yourself. Now, to be honest, I don't know why I didn't get a carry-on. I don't know if this is their policy, like I said, but plenty of other people brought their bags on. It's not clear to me if they paid for them or not. But when the only thing you can do is try to change the great product you already have and you make the process worse so that people can pay you more, that's generally a losing formula, right? Why airlines are so unique in my mind about this is because, well, they have a monopoly on the product, right? They're the only ones with airplanes. It's very hard to find private jets, we'll say, that are like affordable, right? And there's no incentive for them to change because what are we going to do? Go to a different airline? I can tell you this as someone who flies every once in a while. I don't give a fuck what airline I use, whichever one's got the cheapest ticket, right? And most of the time, I'm lucky if I find a cheap ticket. I can't believe I found a $78 fucking ticket flying out of Texas. It's always at least like $100 or $200, right? And trust me, that's just one or two of the options. I flew at 5 a.m. Most of the time, if you really want to go crazy, you can pay $500-$600 for a stupid ass airline ticket that you could also get for $100 $200, right? And I say $100 like that happens. That's the cheapest airline ticket I think I've ever paid, at least in recent history, right? Now, of course, you consider the $45 Uber to the actual airport, and I guess suddenly my whole entire flight experience was about $160, which is still great because a lot of the time these fucking tickets can be at least like $400 or $500, right? How many times have I tried to fly United or Delta and the airline ticket for them is going to be at least $500 or $600 for somewhere that's not even that far? It's like 2 hours away. It's just like, dude, are you fucking serious? This isn't some hodunk airport. These are some of the biggest airports around and it's still that expensive? And at that point, yeah, I usually fly Spirit or Frontier or some dumbass fucking airline because I'm not going to, because it's ridiculous in my mind to pay over like $300 for an airline ticket. Even 300 makes you kind of be like, am I really getting a deal here? Whatever, you can tell that I don't support throwing money at airlines, especially when all their services seem the exact same. For example, if you were blindfolded and told to go on this airplane and you were told to guess which airline you just flew on and you had no knowledge beforehand, you probably wouldn't be able to tell them unless it was Spirit or Frontier because the seats are so small, right? Whatever, my point is that somebody at the top usually points a gun at someone in the middle and says, listen, you have to find me a way to make more money. And even though they have a pretty good product, they have to make some changes like charging extra for people to just bring on bags and stupid shit like that. Yes, they might make more money in the short term, but the amount of resent they garner and the people who have to put up with that now becomes very high, right? So when things start sucking for United and they need to make more money, what do? They point the gun at the consumer and instill pretty bad faith in the consumer to the point where they don't give a shit if they fly in United or Delta. They just want to do whatever's cheapest because there's no difference in flying experience basically, right?